Hello, I am Daniel Keating-Roberts. I'm an opera singer, a singing teacher and a performance coach. I have sung on some of the world's biggest stages, and my students have included Classical Brit Award nominees and famous actors. And today I'm here for Bedford Girls' School to share with you our secrets about performance, how to get the best out of yourself, whether it's in a show or a concert, in your interviews for universities, in sport or in your exams. So let's get going. So today's topic is performance anxiety. And for me, this is the number one performance killer. And we call it performance anxiety, stress, nerves, or just plain old anxiety. And it doesn't matter how famous you are, everybody gets it. So let's take a closer look at it and work out how the superstars manage to turn that nervous energy around so that it helps them set world records or win Oscars or generally get ahead. So the first thing we need to do is accept it. It is real, it does happen, and we can't just ignore it or just get over it, because it really is happening to us, and it affects us up here in the head, and it affects us down here in the body, and we really do experience it. It's like any other feelings that we experience in our lives. We can't just ignore them. We need to accept that they exist and then be able to deal with them. And it doesn't matter how silly or how daft our fears and anxieties seem to other people, because we're the ones experiencing them. And that's okay, because it just means that you are a working human being. Having performance anxiety or fear or nerves or just means that your body is working in the way it's supposed to. So once we accept it, then we can start to change it and move it and start to use that nervous energy in the way that we want to in the moments when we really need it. So let's just have a little look at how it affects the body and why all that stuff is really happening. So performance anxiety or nerves or stress affects everybody differently, and we all experience it differently. So while we're running through this list, if you can think of things that specifically come to mind for you, how it affects your body when you get nervous, just make a list of them in your head, or write them down, or shout them out at the computer screen, or whatever works for you. But for the people that I know and for me, how it affects us in our body, we get very fast heart starts beating really fast. We start breathing very shallow and high up into our chest. We get very hot, very sweaty. We get sweaty hands, sweaty back, sweaty face. For some people it affects their digestion. Some people feel like they need to go to the loo a lot more or go for a wee a lot more. It makes your tongue and jaw and muscles very tight, which obviously for singing very bad. Sometimes it can make your muscles very tight or make some muscles start shaking, especially your legs or your arms or your hands might shake when you get nervous. And this is just the stuff that's affecting us in our body. In our mind, when we get nervous or stressed or have anxiety, we often become very forgetful. We can't remember anything. We do very stupid things that we would never do in our right mind. Like when the teacher shouts at you for an answer, goes, "What's the answer?" and points at you, and suddenly you can't remember a thing. You've been sat there with all the answers so far and it's all been so easy, and suddenly nothing comes into your mind. Your mind literally goes blank because of the stress or anxiety affecting you in that moment. Now, does this just mean that you're dumb or weak or broken or any of those things that we think about when we think about anxiety? No, it absolutely does not. In fact, it means the complete opposite. If you get high anxiety, it means that you are a more developed human. So the higher anxiety levels you have, the more developed a human being you are. And here is why. As human beings, we've been evolving for about 6 million years. Now, exams and performances, they've only been around for a few hundred years. So in evolutionary terms, we really aren't that developed to be able to cope with them. But we've been developing for something else for much, much longer, for that whole 6 million years, and that is survival. What we've really had to worry about for that 6 million years of evolution are things like tigers hiding in the grass, or the bear in the woods, or the saber-toothed tiger, or whatever it was that was trying to kill us. And so as a species, we became very good. We had developed very strong survival instincts. And only because they developed so strong, do we now live in a world where we don't have to worry about saber-toothed tigers or tigers in the grass or whatever it is that was trying to kill us way back then. But we still have these highly developed survival skills. This early warning system, this alarm system that tells us when something is dangerous. And that's all anxiety is. It's just our survival skills. So we can start the process of reprogramming this by changing the words. Anxiety is just a word that somebody made up to describe these feelings, the feeling of these survival instincts kicking in. And so I think if we just start calling it survival instincts, like I have high survival instincts around my concert, or around my hockey match, suddenly it starts to sound very different than I have anxiety around my concert, or I'm nervous about my hockey match, or nervous about my exams. I have high survival instincts. It sounds a lot more rock star. I have high survival instincts about my concerts. I have high survival instincts about my opera. I have high survival instincts about my exams. Well, our survival instincts are still important to us, even now. So we might not have to worry about saber-toothed tigers jumping out and attacking us, but there are lots of other dangers in the world that we still need to think about. So our survival instincts might help protect us from deep water, or they might help protect us from falling in holes, or they might help us move out the way if something's going to fall on us, or they might help us protect a friend who's in trouble, or protect young children. Our survival instincts still play a part in our modern day lives. And once we understand what's happening, then they can also help us when it comes to our performances and our exams. So here's what happens. You perceive a danger, so it could be a tiger hiding in the grass, or it could be the exam coming, or the concert, or whatever it is. You perceive the danger, and the amygdala fires, so this bit at the back of the brain, and it starts pumping into the body cortisol and adrenaline. Cortisol is the stress chemical, adrenaline is the go chemical. Now the cortisol goes into the body and it shuts down anything that it doesn't think is important. So things like digestion, so you get stomach cramps, any other parts of the body, your immune system, anything that's not important for fighting a tiger right in that moment. And the adrenaline goes to all those parts that it does think important and starts giving them lots and lots of energy. So it starts burning through the energy in your body to pass it on to the muscles that it thinks are important for fighting tigers. So that process is very exothermic. It means it gives out heat. So you get hot. That adrenaline is causing you to get hot. And your rib cage tightens up and you start high breathing, because that's the best kind of breathing for running away really quickly from a tiger. Your muscles start to tighten up, ready for action, for punching something, for fighting. Some of your muscles might tighten up even more, ready for freezing, because if you freeze in front of some animals, you become invisible. It's to do with how they see. Some animals only see through movement. So if you're standing still, completely still, you're basically invisible to them. So that's just what happens in the body. In the brain is a whole different matter. So the cortisol affects the brain much like it affects the body. And the brain starts pumping much, much quicker. The brain has a brain beat, a bit like a heartbeat, but completely separate. So it starts pumping really, really quick. and it turns off any part of the brain which it doesn't think is important, any part of the brain that isn't involved in fight, flight or freeze, fighting, flighting or freezing. And that includes things like logical thought, being able to make sense and just be normal. Or memory recall, which is why you forget stuff. You don't have to remember poems when you're fighting a tiger. That's not important in that moment. So the bit of the brain that takes over is this bit at the back, the limbic brain as it's called, the first part of the brain to develop, and that part is directly involved in survival, and that starts getting really active, and that controls your heart, your lungs, and the muscles for fight, flight or freeze. Now, this limbic brain is incredibly well developed for spotting dangers. Because if you remember, we evolved to spot things like a tiger hiding in the grass or a bear hiding in the woods or whatever it was that was going to kill us. And it's so good at this, so good at its job, that it starts anticipating the dangers. So every time that you hear the word exam, for instance, you already start to feel a little bit nervous, feel that reaction, that survival instinct kicking in, going, you should avoid that, that's dangerous. Because somewhere along the way, the brain and the body have learned that that's an uncomfortable situation. And so it wants to avoid all those uncomfortable situations because it only understands that they must be dangerous. That's how the limbic brain works. It's not very good at communicating. So it starts to shut us down. It starts to turn off the brain even before we've got to that stressful situation, to that performance situation. We're already feeling the effects of this survival instinct kicking in. So if we're worrying about the exam, if we're worrying about the performance, if we're worrying about the hockey game, whatever it is, way before we get there, we're already starting to feel that you can't remember anything, or that your body's not moving right, or that you can't run well enough. All of these things are happening because of the survival instincts kicking in, because they've spotted a danger, they've recognized that something is dangerous, and they want to protect you from it. And they just want to do their job. Yes, absolutely. Practicing more, studying harder, working more will definitely help you perform better. But if you're also fighting against anxieties, against fears, then that's going to be very exhausting. Fighting against your own body is very exhausting and is going to take a lot of your energy. So if you can combine the techniques to turn that anxiety around and use that energy for the thing that you're trying to do, for the learning, for the performance, for the exam, for the sport, then you're going to find that you have so much more energy and so much more possibility to do the best that you can do in that moment. Okay, that's enough doom and gloom. We've spelt it out enough. Let's get on to how we deal with it, how we move forward from it, how we use it. Number one is the breath. Okay, so breath is vital for your survival. If you don't breathe, you die. So your limbic brain will always allow you access to it. You can always get connected with your breath, even when you're super nervous. Now, most people will tell you to take a deep breath. But if you're nervous, as we've already discussed, you're breathing very high and shallow into your chest because it's good for running away quick when a tiger comes. So if you're going to take a deep breath, you're only going to increase that pressure. So the way to reset that breath cycle, reset that conversation with the brain, is actually to breathe out. So let all your air out, and then you get to take the big breath. I always like to say, just let the air fall out of you. And then your body will be forced to take a nice, deep, relaxed breath, which will start your body and your brain relaxing again. The next breath exercise that I want you to try to start calming the brain and start relaxing the body is to count breaths. Okay? So I want you to count 10 breaths. But you're only allowed to count them on the way out. So you go 1, 2. You don't have to count them out loud, you can count them in your head. And this sounds much easier than it is, because thoughts and feelings will come into your head. But that's okay. Every time one does, just label it either a thought or a feeling and let it go by. And if you get distracted by thoughts and feelings, then start it all over again. Start counting those breaths again. See how long it takes you to get to 10. Because if you can make it to 10 breaths, counting only on the way out, your mind will be so much calmer. The pumping in the brain that we've talked about will have slowed right down. And then you'll get access to more bits of the brain to be able to bring yourself back into being the best possible version of you for that moment. So now we've started to get the breath under control, and we've started to bring more of the brain online and the body's starting to calm. We can go to the next stage, which is turning on the senses. Now, when we turn on the senses, we start to become what we call present. We start to be able to notice in the space that there is no danger. We start telling our brain that in this space right now, there are no saber-toothed tigers, there's nothing that's going to eat us, there's nothing that's going to kill us, and we start to feel safe just by feeling present. And I know you've heard of mindfulness before, but this is why mindfulness is so important, because it makes us present in the space. And when we're present, we can recognize that there are no dangers and we can start to feel safe, just safe in the space. So my favorite mindfulness exercise is called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. So we start by naming 5 things that we can see in the space around us. So for me, I can see my laptop, I can see the lamp, I can see my TV and the microphone and the bookcase. How many have I got to? I only need 5. 5 things that I can see in the space around me. Notice them and label them. Next, we have 4 things that we can feel. So physically feel, I can feel the texture of my jumper, I can feel my weight on the floor underneath me, I can feel a little draft coming in from the door next to me, and I can feel the tightness of my trousers around my waist. 4 things that you can feel physically in the moment to bring you present. Next, 3 things that you can hear. So I can hear the rustling of the radiator, I can hear the little clock ticking, and I can hear some birds singing outside my window. So 3 things that I can hear in this space right now to make me feel safe. 2 things that I can smell. I can smell the mustiness of my carpet, and I can smell my cup of coffee that I had just before. 2 things that I can smell to bring me present. And 1 thing that I can taste. So I can still taste a little bit of toothpaste from where I brushed my teeth. So 1 thing that I can taste to bring me present. So mindfulness exercise, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. If you're in a place with other people, one of my favourite things to do when you get nervous is to find somebody who is calm, okay, and just watch them, because your brain is full of what are called mirror neurons. So what you see, you tend to copy. It's how babies learn to exist in the world, and we still have them as grown-ups. It's how we sometimes learn stuff as well. So if you can find someone that's calm and just focus in on how are they breathing, how is their heart beating, how are they behaving, what are they looking at, all of these things, just notice a calm person and try to latch on to their system. It will start to affect you so that you feel calm as well. So you can use a teacher, a parent, or a friend, or anyone who's calm in that stressful situation will help you calm your nervous system and become more chilled out so that you become more effective and more of you is working to make you better in that moment. So now we get to move on to the really cool stuff. So we can activate our imagination. And it sounds ridiculous, it sounds crazy, but that is the best way to combat nerves, to combat your anxiety. Because when the prefrontal cortex, which is this bit at the front, the imagination part of the brain, when that is active, the limbic brain, the analytical brain at the back, turns off. The two can't work at the same time. It's like train tracks. You have one or you have the other. So when we're in creativity, when we're in our imagination, then we stop feeling nervous. So actors have been doing it in a different way for ages. They like to imagine the character. They get really into the character. They feel the cold in their hands, and they imagine the wastes of Russia in front of them and the whole backstory that's brought their character there. They imagine all of these things to keep them in this part of the brain. And that's what allows them to stay so in the moment, so feeling so safe in the role that they're delivering, so that they can deliver the best performance possible in that moment. So the way I like to use my imagination when I'm in performance or in a stressful situation is I like to imagine colours. I like to imagine pictures, images. So when I go into an audition or when I'm doing a performance, I have practiced a movie going before me, but going before my eyes. So sometimes I'm growing a tree up in the middle of the auditorium or the room, or sometimes I'm firing fire from my hands, or sometimes it's just a colour that's flowing out from me. And actually this is really good if you're feeling overwhelmed with an emotion, is you can use your imagination, you can picture that emotion, and if it's a colour, if it's a thing, then you can move it, you can change it, you can do anything you like with it, so long as you're using your imagination, because that will start to turn off the limbic brain that we've talked about that is causing this nervous shutdown reaction. So that's just the stuff that works for me personally, but everybody's different. So try out what works for you. You know, maybe it's a little animal that comes along and talks to you, or maybe it's an animal that flies, or, I mean, bear in mind it's your imagination. It could be anything. It can be magical things. It can be a landscape. It can be people. It can be entire worlds. Anything that you want to create. Anything that uses your imagination, which keeps this part of the brain from activating. And the stronger the image, the stronger the thing that you can imagine, the more likely you are to stay in the logical part of the brain, stay with all that brain access, all that brain and body access that will allow you to perform at the highest level, no matter what you're doing. Now, anxiety doesn't always affect you all at once. It's like a brick wall. Sometimes it just builds up over time, and it's only when it gets so high that you can't see over it that suddenly you're overwhelmed by it. We've talked about why this happens before. It's the anticipation of the danger and your body already getting ready for action. So anything that we can do to start taking bricks out of that brick wall before we get even close to the point where we're going to be overwhelmed by it is going to help us stay on top of our anxiety and stay in a place where we can function really, really well. Now, at the moment, that's made extra difficult because we've got this huge anxiety going on around us in the world, this COVID. I didn't want to use the C word, but this COVID situation, which is causing all of us to have already a row of bricks built in our wall, which is why some of us are finding that anxiety is affecting us way more, because our anxiety wall, brick wall, is getting built much, much quicker because there's so many things that are so much more stressful right now. Going to the shops, getting on a bus, hand sanitizer, washing your hands the whole time, all of these things just build up anxiety. And then you throw in something like an exam or a performance or something like that. That extra tiny bit of anxiety that perhaps normally you would have been able to cope with now is suddenly so huge. But it's only because this anxiety brick wall is already half built. So we need to do even more to start taking away those bricks so that it never gets so much that it is overwhelming and we can't cope with it. So there are some things that you know already and have probably already tried. Things like yoga and meditation. Even soldiers use them when they come back from war zones to help calm what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that whole reaction system that brings you into nerves and anxiety. But having practiced your yoga, practiced meditation, practiced getting back into that calm state where you're able to accept new information, where you're able to retrain your brain, where you're able to perform at the high levels, when you've practiced that, then you can get there straight away and be able to access it at those stressful moments when you really need it. Do some exercise. The chemicals of cortisol and adrenaline, when they're running around the body, if you go out and you do something, you take action, you make your body react, which was the whole point of having the cortisol and the adrenaline in the first place, if you actually use that, it burns through them. So the end of a run or a game of hockey or football or whatever it is, you feel calmer, you feel better. Not only have you produced endorphins, which make you feel good, but you've also burnt through some of the stress chemicals. So afterwards, you will feel calmer. Now, have you ever noticed how the feelings of excitement and fear and love and all of these things kind of feel a little bit similar in the body? Something that's really interesting is that the body and the brain have really limited ways of communicating. So basically, the body just says to the brain, after a bit of stimulus, says, there's something going on. And it feeds a bunch of chemicals into the brain, and it's up to the brain to interpret what that something was and take the appropriate action. So either keep the chemicals going to take action, or to let them go because there's no danger. Now, that chemical burst can last just 90 seconds before we've burnt through it. Just 90 seconds. So I want you to imagine that someone has said to you the word exam. Now, for most of us, we hear the word exam and suddenly the chest goes tight and we get all those feelings of anxiety that come from the E word. And I want you to start thinking, exam, that's so exciting. Because for most of us, when we think of the E word, it's quite a frightening thing. We have to learn a bunch of stuff and there's a lot of pressure and we have to sit in the room and then there's a result and there's all this stuff around the E word that we don't really like. It doesn't make us feel very good. So we're just going to change how we think about it. Now again, sports people use this all the time. If you listen to a tennis player talking about a big match coming up, they'll always say, I'm really excited about it. I can't wait for it. Even if they're playing the best player in the world and they've got absolutely no chance of winning, they always say, I'm really excited about it. Because it starts to change the conversation between the body and the brain. It starts to turn it around. So it takes what would be the something turning into, I'm frightened, I'm afraid of it, there's a danger, into, I'm excited for it, I can't wait for it. This is going to be brilliant. There's going to be a good outcome at the end of it. Now, how many times do you think you need to say the E word is exciting in order for your brain to start believing it? Have a guess. The answer is 28 times. So if you do something 28 times, it becomes a habit. So if you, when you hear the E word, if you hear that word and you think, that's exciting, I can't wait, on 28 different occasions, then from then on, whenever you hear that E word, you will think, that's exciting. So that when it comes to the exam, or we could use performance, I probably should have used concert, performance, whatever it is, hockey game, whatever that moment of peak performance is, when you really need it, you'll be excited. You'll be able to access all of this imagination, all of the information. You'll be able to access your memory. You'll be able to access your logical thought. Be able to access all of the possibilities of your body. So you can be the best in that moment because it's exciting. And you can do this with any emotion. You can go, okay, so there's a thing that I don't like. Great, let's turn it around. Because you know that conversation can only could just last 90 seconds. And then it can be whatever you want it to be. But you've got to practice it. So it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen if you do it 1 time, 2 times. You've got to do it again and again and again till you have programmed in this new programming, this new idea. The performance is exciting, the concerts are exciting, the exams are exciting, and we all know what exciting feels like. If I got you to imagine that you were at the fairground, but you were a kid. You were a really young kid at the fairground, and you'd eaten a whole bunch of candy floss, and you had a bunch of sodas every day, and you'd have a souvenir hat, and it was just the best day. And someone had said, let's go on your favourite ride, and you'd been on it and you'd come off, and what that would feel like. And then someone turned around to you and said, we're going to come back again tomorrow. And I want you to imagine what that feels like in your body and how exciting that is and how brilliant it feels, because you're just a kid. All you know is excitement about coming back tomorrow to this amazing place which has candy floss and soda and rides and souvenirs. And everybody's happy and it's brilliant. Imagine that feeling in your body. Imagine that feeling of excitement. If you were to make the noise of excitement, if you're somewhere that you can make noise, you'd probably be like, yeah! It's something like that. You'd make the noise of excitement and your body would release and it would all be amazing. And breathe. So, we all know immediately the feeling of excitement. We know the feelings of happiness. We know all of these things. They're all in there. And we can get access to them if we turn those feelings around. So imagine going into a performance or a concert or an exam with that feeling. Imagine how well you would perform. Imagine how well you would do if you could go in feeling like that. Imagine going in and coming out feeling like that. Suddenly, these things that were once super scary, they were dangers to your brain because your brain only knows survival, suddenly become really great experiences. Things that you want to do. So suddenly you want to run races. You want to sing in opera houses. You want to sing on big stages. You want to do exams. You want to do all these things that before were like climbing a mountain. Now they're like getting on a rocket ship. They're amazing. And the more you can practice that, the more you can practice that feeling, that sensation around these things, suddenly the whole world can change for you and you can become the best in these moments of stress. You can become the one person who is excelling in the moments that you really need to. So we've run out of time on this video. I'm pretty sure I've long overrun my time, but thank you so much for making it all the way through to the end of this video. I really hope it helps you. I hope it's given you some new things to think about, maybe new things that you can try out. And that's the thing, is everybody is unique. Everybody works in different ways, so just find out the things that work for you. Some of these things you might think are complete nonsense, and some of them you might think are absolutely brilliant, and even if it only helps you a little bit, it helps you get just that little bit ahead, helps you gain that little bit extra to perform your best. If you have any more questions about this stuff, just head to your music director. He's a fantastic guy, and he'll be able to help you out or point you in the right direction for more resources, or put you in touch with me. Who knows? So enjoy the rest of your term and enjoy being the best that you can be.